Saving America one entrepreneur at a time, it's the Biz Rap Podcast with your host, Michael Manahan. The show that celebrates small business and entrepreneurs, it's Biz Rap Radio with your host, small businessman, educator, and author, Michael Manahan. And welcome to another edition of Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. And thank you so much for joining us today. I give you a very, very warm welcome from downtown Long Beach, California. Of course, Biz Rap Radio is the show all about small business and entrepreneurs. We're the show that's out there fighting for small businesses, the drivers of our economy. I don't know if you heard Hillary Clinton there was giving a speech, and she said, well, you know, businesses and corporations really don't create jobs. I don't know what she's been smoking, but we're going to talk more about that perhaps on another one of our shows or later on in the show today. But Biz Rap Radio, with a show about small business and entrepreneurs. Today we've got, and I'm very, very excited to have this particular gentleman on the line with me today. He is a musician, journalist, administrator, professor, and psychologist who's also an entrepreneur, leader, and business consultant. I mean, what else could the guy do? I mean, is there any time left or anything else? But I'm very happy to welcome to the show Dr. David Gruder. David, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Now, you founded the Integrity Culture Systems, and you're known as America's Integrity Expert. Can you tell our listeners just a little more about your background and what you do?
Sure. Well, my background, the important part of my background is that I went to Woodstock. My parents sent me, actually. It's a very funny story, but it was a profoundly eye-opening experience around the potential for culture change. And that really has informed a huge amount of my career. The formal part of my background, however, is that my PhD is in clinical psychology, which is the deep dives inwardly, the personal development pieces, and organizational development psychology, which is the deep dives systemically in how businesses and other organizations function systemically. And what I do with that combination of personal development and culture development is I'm essentially a business success psychologist.
Well, that is exciting, and I'm not sure if you know, but organization change is actually something that's a passion for me. I am currently working on my doctorate in organization change at Pepperdine University. I give a big shout out to Pepperdine, and I'm actually working on my dissertation right now, and I hope to be finished and actually have my doctorate by the first semester of next year. So it certainly gives us something in common at this whole area of organization change.
Wonderful. I'm delighted about that.
But you know that's a great background, and you know one of the things and people have a big problem with, and I'm not sure why it is, but we as humans, whether it be individually or as organizations, are very resistant to change. We really don't. We aren't effective change artists, if you will. What from a psychological perspective, why is that?
Well, there are a couple of important factors connected to that, but I think the one that, of all of them, that intrigues me the most is how, especially in today's world, people tend to identify their sense of self through their ideology, through their paradigm, through their belief system. And so when their cherished assumptions or beliefs are somehow challenged, or the foundations of their existing belief system are challenged, they become very, very scared, and often scared in very blustery, defensive, dramatic kinds of ways. I refer to it as paradigm attachment disorder. And it's a very human and very understandable kind of dynamic where when we are used to seeing the world or some segment of the world, like our role in an organization or our business's mission or whatever it might happen to be entrepreneurially, in a particular way, and something comes along and challenges cherished assumptions, that tends to be scary. And unfortunately, in my judgment, in the deterioration of our society, fewer and fewer people come out of school armed with the skills necessary to really embrace and lean into change and harvest really valuable gifts from unexpected and even undesired life experiences.
Yeah, one of the things I do is I teach business communications at California State University, and a big shout out to Cal State as well. And one of the things we talk about is the massive barriers to effective communications that humans can put up, and I think that we put up those exact same barriers to change. But I want to change the subject here because you and I think, share a passion for something, and that is what I would call the American dream. And I'm an immigrant. I came here 25 years ago. I came here with basically, the change in my pocket. Was looking for a better life, as I think a lot of new immigrants do. I think I've achieved what I thought was most of the American dream anyway, but I see that the American dream that I came here for, and that I think many, many immigrants came here for, is either at significant risk or else it's actually gone. What do you think about the American dream? What was the formula used to construct the original American dream?
Well, a very, very different formula than what it was replaced with in the 1950s. The original American dream that was really set forth in the U.S. Declaration of Independence and Constitution was creating a country in which the ultimate goal was articulated as the pursuit of happiness. And the way that goal of the pursuit of happiness was going to be attained was through this alchemical blending of personal freedom and the common good. And so that kind of personal expression, self-expression, and freedom to live our lives the way that we feel called to do, while not doing that in a way that harms, but rather helps society strengthen itself and function better. And that was really the founding vision. It's an audacious, really truly audacious vision for a country because, as you know, there are ongoing tensions between the drive for personal freedom and the drive for preserving the common good.
Yeah, well, absolutely, and that personal freedom is such a huge issue. And for anybody who's a student of history, which I am, and I've read thousands of history books, going back from recent history right to ancient history, the whole idea of personal freedom, individual personal freedom, was so new and radical when the United States was created that it really was almost a miracle, if you will, because never before had we had a society where really personal freedom was a focus and an objective of the organizational structure of society, if you will. Everybody was always had their personal freedom limited by somebody who was an overseer of some sort, whether it was a king, a nobleman, a count, or some person who was oppressing you and telling you what to do all the time. But David, I want your response, but before we get to it, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of the segment. I've got to go to commercial break. It's your host, Michael Manahan, Biz Rap Radio. I am on the line with Dr. David Gruder, and we are talking about the American dream, and we will be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan, here in segment 2 of the show. Of course, Biz Rap Radio, the show all about small business and entrepreneurs. Right now, back to our guest, Dr. David Gruder, who is as we mentioned previously, a musician, journalist, administrator, professor, and psychologist. But he's also an individual who has a passion about helping businesses and entrepreneurs, and in particular has some significant thoughts about what we classically in the United States call the American dream, and we were talking about freedom and liberty. David, thanks for sticking with us for this part of the show.
Oh, sure.
So we talked about what the original American dream was, and then that started to change. What was it? Maybe in the 1950s or something?
Yes, it was a very different version of the American dream was very deliberately installed in the 1950s. And I'm not talking about conspiracy theory here. It was installed for some very understandable and actually laudable reasons. Unfortunately, that version of the American dream completely undermined the original version of the American dream.
So what was that new version of the American dream that kind of came about?
Well, if it's all right with you, maybe it would be helpful to say what caused it to be birthed first.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely.
Then it'll make more sense. At the end of World War II, Harry Truman was president, and he really had two main concerns. The first concern was that the United States' economy had bounced back from the Great Depression because of a wartime footing. In other words, it had recovered from the Great Depression on a wartime economy, and he wanted the economy to continue to grow in peacetime. The second thing that he was concerned about, very concerned about, and he wasn't alone, was that what happened in Nazi Germany could happen anywhere, including in the United States. And the reason he was particularly concerned about that was that the Nazi Minister of Propaganda's tactics for engineering the the temporarily highly successful Nazi propaganda campaign, his name was Herr Joseph Goebbels, had modeled his campaign around the published works of the father of modern public relations, who was an American by the name of Edward Bernays. And in the States, long before World War II, people in business and politics already long knew that Bernays' tactics for public relations were very, very highly powerful and effective. But they had no idea just how powerful they were until Joseph Goebbels got his hands on Edward Bernays' published works in the 1920s. And so that was why Truman was very concerned that what happened in Nazi Germany could happen everywhere, anywhere, including the United States, because the tactics used were developed by an American.
Oh my gosh! I never knew that. That is absolutely amazing. So the German propaganda machine was based on fundamentals developed by an American public relations expert.
Yes, and he was called the father of modern public relations, Edward Bernays. And,
oh my gosh!
As a side piece, the reason that Bernays' tactics were so powerful was that they reached deep into the unconscious mind of individuals for the purpose of social engineering. And where did Bernays develop his understanding of how to manipulate the unconscious mind? From his uncle, Sigmund Freud.
Oh my gosh! So you have a world famous, if you will, psychologist who then perhaps transfers some of his knowledge to his nephew, who goes into public relations, and there is the foundation for the German propaganda machine. That is really scary.
It's very scary, and in fact, Bernays' most popular book, the title is Propaganda. It was published in 1928. You can still find it on Amazon.com. And he just laid, in all of his books, he just laid out very transparently what his social engineering tactics were. And his term for the strategy was manufactured consent, the manufacturing of consent.
Wow. So what happened then in the 1950s as Truman's kind of discovered all of this stuff, and what changes occurred? Right.
Well, in the late 40s, Truman assembled a group of politicians and business people and charged them with the task of coming up with a plan for how to keep the economy growing in peacetime and minimize the chances that what happened in Nazi Germany could happen here. And what that group hatched was what they called the American Dream. It was the 1950s version. And what the 1950s version of the American Dream did is that it redefined the pursuit of happiness as excessive consumerism. And underlying the word excessive, right? Nothing wrong with toys and things and adventures and stuff like that, but when excessive consumerism becomes a new definition for what happiness is, that sets all kinds of things in motion. And freedom got replaced with conformity. There was a very specific lifestyle that we were expected to have, starting in the 1950s. The home with the white picket fence and the 1.8 children, I'm being tongue-in-cheek, of course, and the 2 cars and the vacation and all the latest consumer appliances and things like that. And so conformity to that version of how to live in order to be happy replaced freedom, and what replaced social responsibility, attending to the common good, was overwork in order to climb the ladder, work more and more hours in a job that one didn't necessarily love, for a company whose values one didn't necessarily agree with, in order to make more and more money, in order to afford to buy all of the things that we were supposed to buy in order to pursue this new definition of happiness. And the people in the workforce really came to understand that that doing that for their family was what love looked like. How did this entire 1950s version of the American Dream get embedded in society? Well, through Edward Bernays' manufactured consent tactics.
That is incredible, and you know it resonates, because I still hear people today. Because I'm passionate about the American Dream, I'll ask people. My students are good examples, and business people I know. I'll say, what is the American Dream? And they say, oh, well, it's a house with a white picket fence. I mean, that has been embedded in the mindset, but the original American Dream was really all about freedom and also about oppression. It was about the idea that you could come to America and you could, through your own independence, that you could better your life and the life of others, and particularly family and people you were close to. So that was completely changed and co-opted, and yet still in our society that theme runs through about that house with the white picket fence.
Absolutely. And, talk about unintended consequences. I don't really believe that at least the majority of the people who engineered and installed the 1950s version of the American Dream thought, oh, goody, we're going to be launching something that is going to be directly responsible for the hijacking of happiness, health, prosperity, governance, journalism, education, et cetera, goes on and on and on and on, hijacking a business as well. I don't think they could have foreseen those unintended consequences any more than Einstein, when he stumbled into the theory of relativity, said to himself, "Oh, goody, E approximates mc squared. Now we can manufacture nuclear weapons."
Absolutely, absolutely. So what are these unintended consequences that we're now dealing with, I'm sure, from this co-opting, if you will, of the American dream?
Well, the first couple of unintended consequences that started in the 1950s is that businesses started to create products and services that they believed they could manufacture demand for using Edward Bernays' manufactured consent tactics, because remember, Bernays was the father of modern public relations, so they loved his stuff. And so in service of the new American dream, they were going to invent demand for things that people didn't necessarily need, and by teaching them that they did need those things. And as consumer spending started to skyrocket at the beginning in the latter part of the 1950s, consumer debt skyrocketed with it, because the cost of attaining the American dream far exceeded the amount of income that most Americans were bringing home through their paychecks. And so credit card debt really started to skyrocket. At the same time, the notion of let's control symptoms, let's just make life easier no matter what the unintended consequences are, led to the creation of fake food, which in turn created the hijacking of health, along with the symptom orientation that the takeover of the health industry by the unethical side of the pharmaceutical industry saw to. There's a really unholy partnership between the unethical side of the pharmaceutical industry and the unethical side of the food industry.
David, I'm going to have to interrupt you. We're going to have to go to commercial break. This is such interesting stuff. I'm absolutely loving it. And I also want to get from you some ideas and thoughts for our entrepreneurs out there. But it is your host, Michael Manahan. It is Biz Rap Radio. We're on the line with Dr. David Gruder, and we're going to be back right after these commercial messages. Welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. And again, thank you for joining us today. We're just having an absolutely enthralling conversation with Dr. David Gruder all about the American dream and how that dream was hijacked by basically a gentleman who wrote a book on propaganda, if you will, who was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and that very book and this gentleman's ideas were used by the Germans to basically brainwash the German people, and the same methodologies were used here in the United States, basically to co-opt what we thought was the original American dream. David, thanks for sticking with us for this segment of the show.
My pleasure. And just to amplify one piece, Edward Bernays wrote a number of books, the most popular of which is the book Propaganda.
Okay, now, if anybody's interested in this topic, or David, they're interested in perhaps contacting you or communicating with you, where can they go? How can they find out more? How can they get a hold of you?
Well, the best website of mine to go to for this material is a free membership website, and the URL for that is hijackingofhappiness.com.
Okay, great.
Hijackingofhappiness.com. You can contact me through that website, hijackingofhappiness.com.
Okay, fantastic. Now, David, we've been talking about this American Dream stuff, and maybe give us your final thoughts on it, because then I'd also like to talk to you a little bit about, maybe you've got some ideas, and I know you're an expert on people skills, that maybe you can talk to us a little bit about some people skills and things that entrepreneurs can do to help them with their success. Sure.
Happy to switch gears with you.
You know what? There's been a kind of a big push in in business, over the past, I don't know, maybe the past 15 or 20 years, that you bring in these high-powered motivational speakers to try and, get people geared up and energize the troops, if you will. Does that stuff really work?
Great question. Absolutely great question, Mike. No. in the short version, no. Now, the qualification on that is that it really does work. That motivational stuff works if it's the front end of a culture architecture process where new skills are being taught to people and procedures are being embedded for the utilization of those skills. So if motivational speaking is the front end of a true upgrade process, then the motivation does rally the troops and get them excited about doing the shifting. But what's happened so classically in the business world is this fluffy bunny stuff, the motivational speaking, and that's it. And then the business owner is thinking, well, I brought in these high-powered, high-priced people. Why haven't my employees and managers and executives changed? And what they end up doing, and this just breaks my heart, is that these business owners who have done this, have made this mistake, have ended up erroneously concluding that human potential and psychology really have nothing to offer the business world, when in fact what has nothing to offer the business world is motivational speaking by itself.
Okay. So there's more to it than just bringing in a speaker to rally the troops. You've got to actually embed within your organization some of the perhaps the cultural changes that the motivational speaker is talking about when he talks to your troops.
Exactly. And to put it in a framework, if you think about what motivational speakers talk about, they talk about 2 out of the 4 areas of culture change, and those have to do with intentions, motivations, and values. And the other 2 aspects of culture architecture and culture upgrades are skills and procedures. And motivational speakers aren't designed to cover those areas. That's not their bailiwick.
Interesting. So what's your advice then to a small business owner out there that's saying, hey, look, I've got a pretty good team here. I've got a small group of employees that work for me, but I think they could do a lot better. I think I could just really energize them more. I could get more out of them. I could make them more productive and perhaps even make them happier. But how do I go about doing that?
Right. Well, the solution to that is about embedding the skills and procedures that convert the values of things like integrity and collaboration into practical actions that enable a company to walk its talk. And there are 3 areas of skills and procedures development that really are I have found are the turnkey to that implementation. And those 3 skill sets have to do with how agreements are constructed, work agreements, engagement agreements, collaboration agreements, team agreements, how you do breakdown repair when those agreements go sideways, and how you do performance reviews.
Okay, so a lot of it is about what I would call design. It's about organizational design. How do you design your organization to achieve what you're trying to achieve from it?
Well, yes, and the design is the strategic planning part. The training is where the rubber meets the road, and where the sustainability comes in is where the training gets embedded in the daily functioning in the culture.
And now, how important is the business owner or the business leader in this whole process?
Oh, absolutely crucial, because frankly, my soundbite is that leaders build businesses at the level of their psychological limitations instead of their entrepreneurial intentions.
Hang on, you got to say that again.
Okay. Leaders build businesses at the level of their psychological limitations instead of their entrepreneurial intentions.
Interesting.
And I'm talking about leaders that are well-intended people. I'm not talking about, malicious, malevolent, or ill-intended folks. But what happens is that when you have a well-intended leader who doesn't know how to create the building blocks that create high-performance collaboration cultures, then all of their good intentions end up just causing them to pull their hair out because they don't know how to train and embed the skills and procedures that are necessary in order to make collaboration profitable.
Now, that's so interesting. This reminds me, I'm going to tell a little side story here, but many years ago, I worked for a reasonably good-sized organization. And the CEO of the company, I was chief financial officer, the CEO of the company went to one of those motivational seminars. And, of course, at the end of some of those seminars, they sell the books and the materials and what have you. So he comes back with an armload of books, and he starts passing out all of these books to all the executives in the company and says, you guys all need to read this. This is really important stuff. And then after we finished reading the book, we're all sitting around thinking, well, hang on, the one who really needs to read this is the CEO himself.
Yes, exactly. It's the old saying about we teach best what we most need to learn.
That is so
and
amazing.
that's why culture change really has to simultaneously occur from the top down and the bottom up.
David, I hate to do this. We are running out of time. Where can people get a hold of you if they're interested in your services as a speaker or a consultant for their business?
Sure. The website to go to for that is my main website, which is drgruder.com. That's drgruder.com.
Okay, I really wish we had more time because this is such interesting and fascinating stuff. Maybe I can have you back on the show again in the future because we've covered such important material here. But go to drgruder.com. Check it out. Also, what was the other website about the American Dream? Give us that one once again.
Sure. Hijackingofhappiness.com.
Hijackingofhappiness.com. David, thank you very much for being on the show. I really, really appreciate it. And we'll be back right after these messages. And welcome back to Biz Rap Radio. It's your host, Michael Manahan. Thanks for sticking with us. Wow, was that ever an interesting time we spent with Dr. David Gruder, and in particular talking about the American Dream. Just such a travesty how the very concept of the American Dream has been bifurcated, if you will, or corrupted by people who misunderstand it and have tried to twist it into something that it is not. But speaking of the American Dream, one of the American dreams is to do well financially, and particularly for your children. And there's one way of doing that in America. That's owning a business, and that's why we're Biz Rap Radio. We're all about business people and entrepreneurs. But I'm reading an article, got off the internet, about Chicago. Chicago City Council is expected to pass an ordinance that will make it tougher to redevelop single-room occupancy hotels. You know those old hotels that they're typically in seedy areas, and the tenants aren't tourists who come in for a vacation. The tenants tend to be permanent residents. They're really not hotels per se. They're really permanent resident facilities. I mean, I think of a hotel, that's a place where you come and you stay for a few nights and then you leave. But these older properties, of course, they're no longer attractive for travelers, and so what happens is they rent them out, and a lot of the people who live in these hotels are people living on fixed incomes. They could be senior citizens. They could be otherwise homeless people. They could be people with disabilities, who are getting government subsidies or the government's paying for their accommodation. And by the way, I'm a huge believer that our government does have an obligation. We as people, forget about our government, because technically the government is supposed to be us, but we as people in a civilized society, we have an obligation to take care of those people who have a difficult time taking care of themselves, whether it be the elderly, whether it be the infirm, whether it be people with mental disorders, whatever you want to call it. But we do need to take care of these people. But in Chicago, what they're going to do is they're going to basically pass a bunch of laws that restrict development or redevelopment of these old ratty hotel properties. Now, you've all seen these properties. Most of them are blights on the community. They look terrible. They're not well maintained in many cases because the owners are not getting enough income off of the properties in order to keep them up and keep them maintained well. So what happens? The properties look like crap. And they're a blight on the local community. Well, what happens is some enterprising entrepreneur comes in and buys one of these hotels and then decides, you know what, I can take and fix this place up. I can put some money into it. I can make it a nicer building, and then I can rent it out for more reasonable rents. But, when you do that, it puts some of those people who are living in those properties, they may have a tough time finding a place to live. So Chicago's solution is to make it more difficult for the owners of these properties to fix them up, clean them up, make them nice-looking properties. And in addition, if you do want to fix up your property, by the way, the property that you own, that you used your money to pay for, well, guess what? You're going to have to pay to relocate the tenants. Yet you, the owner of the property, might have to pay as much as over $10,000 per tenant to relocate these people. Now, look at how could the government be more abusive in its power? Why are you singling out the owner of a specific building and saying, you, the owner of that specific building, you want to improve your property, you want to upgrade the building, upgrade the community, but you're going to have to pay a significant penalty because the people who are currently living in your building might not be able to find a place to stay economically. Well, why is it that individual property owners' responsibility? If it's society's responsibility to provide housing for people, then why isn't the city of Chicago putting up the money and building facilities for these people who otherwise don't have homes? Why are you forcing and making a single burden on an individual property owner? Meanwhile, of course, just a couple of hours down the freeway from Chicago, we've got Detroit, and in the suburbs of Detroit, Wayne County in particular, which is a suburb of Detroit. Guess what? You've got, it's hard to really find out the exact number, but it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 70,000 abandoned buildings. And by the way, I was looking on the internet, and some of these properties, they just need to be bulldozed down. I'm reading an article here that says about 10% of these properties should be immediately bulldozed down. But a lot of these properties actually look pretty good. Now, we got 70,000 abandoned properties a couple hours from Detroit. We got a situation in Detroit where we're basically forcing people who own property to pay a significant penalty if they want to redevelop their property and make it look nicer and start to actually, improve the neighborhood by putting in upgrading their property so it's not a rat-infested dump. Why can't we take, if we have a problem with housing in Chicago, we're talking about people who aren't working anyways. They're on some sort of assistance. A couple hours down the road, you've got 70,000 buildings. Why don't we give those people a building in outside of Detroit? And heck, instead of paying rent, it says here that some cases they're paying up to $700 a month to stay in these old ratty hotels. The city of Detroit's basically giving these properties away for $500 each, and that's a house with 3 or 4 bedrooms. So why not you put 3 or 4 of these folks from Chicago? You give them a house in in outside of Detroit, and hey, you not only don't have to pay rent, but on top of that, you have a house, and maybe you've got 3 or 4 other people living in the house with you, and you form a little community there, and you can help each other out. I mean, we are. It seems the answer to every problem we have in the United States is to take some business person and tax him or charge him some sort of fees as if that's going to solve the problem. So we have a housing problem in Chicago for low-income people, whether they be disabled, whether they be just old people on fixed-income pensions. We have a housing problem in Chicago. So the answer is to take the owners, the business owners, and to force those business owners to pay a fee or a penalty or a tax that will keep them from redeveloping their particular property and will maintain neighborhoods with blighted old hotel buildings that really nobody but the people at the lowest part of the economic stratum would want to live in. It just seems to me it's ludicrous, and it's another example of why government and rules and regulations are crushing growth in this country. I mean, here you got people. Look at I just think about this. There's an entrepreneur in Chicago who says, "Look, I own this ratty old piece of property. I'm gonna redevelop it. I'm gonna put money into it. That I'm gonna buy things to fix this property up. I'm gonna hire people to fix this property up. I'm going to improve the look of the neighborhood." And the city of Chicago says, "No, hold it. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to pay a bunch of fines and penalties because you've got people living in that building, and you're going to have to relocate them because, heck, it's not our responsibility." Well, this is going on across the country in city after city, county after county, foolish, ridiculous rules and regulations that is limiting not only the personal freedoms of the business owners, but it's also limiting the economic recovery of our country at a time when we need to be creating jobs. And it just, again, there's hundreds of solutions for helping out people who need housing. And part of those solutions might be using the 70,000 abandoned buildings a couple hours down the road. But no, the government solution in Chicago is screw it to the business owner. Screw that entrepreneur who's trying to improve his life, trying to make it better for him and his family. He's trying to pursue the American dream. No, screw him. It's absolutely ridiculous. Well, on that note, we're going to move on here at BizRap Radio. You know, we believe we can fix the United States of America through a fundamental concept that individuals pursuing their own economic interests in free markets will create more prosperity for more people than can ever be achieved through government regulations and a planned economy. It's BizRap Radio. We are fixing America through individual economic freedom. I'm your host, Michael Manahan, and thank you so much for joining us. We will be back again next week with another edition of BizRap Radio.